Hi everyone, how's it going? This is going to be a video where I'm going to take you through the second assignment that you're going to start working on today, essentially. Before we start though, one thing I will say is this is going to be a really long video, so I'm not expecting you at all to watch it all the way through because that'd be mental. So what I will do is I'll put timestamps in the description of the video so you can find what bit you need to go through. The only bits I would say you need to watch straight away is this little introduction I go through, and then from then on, whatever sections I want you to work on, those are the sections that you'll need to watch. I mean, if you really want to, you can watch the entire video, go for it, but I'm not saying you have to do that because I can think of many other better things that you might want to be doing in the sunshine rather than sat listening to me talking about assignment 2. So in this video, I'm going to be taking you through the content of assignment 2. I'm going to go through all the different sections that you need to talk about, and then I'm also going to go through the assessment criteria as well, so you know exactly what it is you need to do. One thing I will say before we start going through all this is that this assignment is a big assignment, and it is a big written assignment, but we're going to chip away at it slowly, so it's not just going to be one huge mammoth piece of writing I'm expecting you to get done in about 2 weeks. Okay, it's going to be one big assignment that we will chip away at very slowly, so it doesn't become too sort of monotonous, I suppose. Okay, so the scenario for this assignment is you've been commissioned to produce a BTEC textbook chapter outlining the qualities necessary for effective factual writing in print products. This chapter should critically evaluate the qualities necessary for effective factual communication with supporting arguments and elucidated examples, and you must also use subject terminology correctly. I've underlined some of the key points in the scenario here, but I'll go over those in a bit more detail as we go through the video. So basically, what you're going to be doing is writing a report. It's quite similar to the magazine industry research report that we did last year, in the sense that it is a lot of writing. There isn't going to be a word count for this, because it's one of those assignments where you need to make sure you've spoken about the things that are on the criteria that you need to speak about. But what I would say is that for any half decent assignment, you're probably going to be looking at least 2,000 words for this assignment. I'd probably say that's around about a minimum. It sounds like a lot, but considering how much you've got to talk about, you should realistically fly past that stuff pretty easily. Again, I've made a template for you, which I will show you in a bit, and everything that is on that template needs to be covered in order for you to meet the pass criteria. Okay? Speaking of the criteria, this is why we are doing it. So the good thing is about this assignment is it only covers one unit. This isn't one of the assignments that we will be doing this year that covers more than one unit. It's just for one. So that does make things a little bit easier right off the bat. So we're going to be looking towards this particular learning objective here, which is understand the qualities necessary for effective factual communication. Now what that basically means is you just need to be able to understand what makes a good piece of factual writing. Okay, I will go over what we mean by factual writing in a bit, but you need to be able to understand what makes it good. Okay, what makes it effective? What are the different techniques you can use to make something effective in terms of a factual piece of writing, whether it's a newspaper article, a magazine article, an informative document, whatever. You need to be able to understand what the different techniques are to make that effective and make it effective for the reader. Again, pass merit distinction criteria here. Realistically, the main thing that separates the pass from the merit and the distinction criteria is this bit here. It's the examples. Okay, I will provide you with some examples that you can talk about, but a lot of the examples you'll need to find are going to be ones you need to find yourself. So in a way, I suppose it's probably very similar to the very first assignment we did last year, where we looked at the legal, ethical and social obligations of journalists. It's a bit similar to that. Okay, the pass criteria you've basically just got to show that you understand the qualities. So you understand these things here, you know what they are, you know what the advantages, disadvantages are, blah, 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 blah. But then pushing towards a merit and distinction level, you need examples. You need detailed examples, okay? So you've got two keywords here that says detailed illustrative examples for a merit, but then you've got elucidated examples for a distinction, okay? Elucidated basically just means very detailed. Again, I've taken this from the unit spec as well, which are all on Moodle for you to look at, or you can find them on the BTEC website. I've highlighted the bits here that are going to be most important for you to be aiming for a distinction grade. So it says here, to achieve distinction, this one here, you need to be discussing the qualities necessary for factual communication, but also developing ideas critically, i.e. comparing, assessing and discriminating, with supporting arguments or evidence, explaining precisely what it is about that exemplifies the point it illustrates. Now what that basically means is it's referring to the examples that you give. So when you're talking about the first example, you shouldn't just be saying here's what this thing means, here's an example, see you later. You want to be talking about here's the thing I'm talking about, here's an example, here's why it's a particularly good example, here's what makes it effective. You want to be essentially analysing it and critically evaluating something. You're not just saying here's an example, you're saying here's why it's a good example and comparing it to a bad example as well, okay? Comparing it, assessing them and discriminating them is what you need to do to get a distinction. So, here's how this assignment is going to work. This is, if everything was as normal and we were in college like we should be, most of this assignment would still be done for homework anyway, purely because it is a text-heavy assignment, and I don't like it when people are just sat in a classroom, you know, typing on keyboards for an hour and a half. So the way we approach this assignment is not that different, really. What I've done is, in your OneDrive folder, and I think I've done everyone's OneDrive folder. If it's not there, then give me an email, I'll sort it out. I've created a folder which contains everything that you need. It's got a template in there, it's got the brief in there, it's got this PowerPoint in there, and it's got a folder that's got some examples in there as well. I will send out loads more examples when I found some, because the folder is a bit bare, but I've got plenty more that I'll be sending out to you. Now on Mondays, I'm going to be saying which sections I want you to be working on that particular week. So I might say, right, okay, this week you work on the first 3 bullet points or whatever, okay? And that's the minimum that I'm going to be setting. So I am going to be giving you staggered deadlines. So here you go, crack on, and then see you in a few weeks, okay? It is something that I'm going to be checking regularly as well. So, and what I set is going to be the minimum as well. Okay, if you want to move faster than that, then you go for it and move faster than that. But the sections that I set need to be completed for the following week, and I will be checking and I will be giving feedback, and anyone who is consistently missing deadlines will be chased up. So if you go into your OneDrive folder, I'll just use this one as an example, right? There should be a folder in here called Assignment 2 Effective Factual Communication. Okay, in here you've got 4 different documents. You've got this PowerPoint presentation I'm going through right now, you've got the template, and you've got the assignment brief. You don't really need to worry too much about the assignment brief because most of the detail is on here. So all the work that you should do for this assignment should be in here. Okay, if it's not there, have a quick check and let me know and I can add it to your folder, but I'm pretty sure I've got everyone's in there. So this assignment is split into 2 different sections. They're both particularly substantial sections and they've each got a lot of stuff in there. Section 1 is talking about the different types of factual communication and what techniques are available to writers when they're discussing factual communication. And section 2 is on effective factual communication, which is some of the different techniques that you can use in terms of language and grammar and stuff like that. There is a little bit of crossover in this section too with what we did last year. So there will be some stuff that you already know, but it's always nice to go over it again just as a bit of a recap and refresher. Okay, so when we're talking about factual communication, most people would assume that we're talking about things like newspapers, and we are to some extent, but there's a lot more things that we could discuss when we're talking about factual communication. So any sort of factual writing is, as you might have guessed, a piece of writing that's intended to communicate fact to its reader. So we've got two different types of factual writing that we're going to focus on. The first one is looking at informative documents, which includes things like how-to guides, instruction manuals, and leaflets. Now we have done a little bit about that already when we looked at assignment 1 for your how-to guide, and then we've also got some stuff on factual journalism as well, which again we did a little bit of last year, which is focusing on newspapers, magazines, and web. So these are the things that we're going to be looking at for not just for this assignment, but for the entire unit, I suppose. The unit is called Factual Writing for Print. So everything that we do for that unit will be working towards this sort of area. So we'll do some stuff on newspapers, we've already started some stuff on how-to guides. So it's all going to be going towards this particular stuff. Okay, so section 1, types of factual communication. So the first thing we need to look at is the different types of different types of informative documents. I'm on a blank then. That fall under the factual writing subheading. So the first one we're looking at is informational leaflets. Now these are, I'm sure you will have all seen these things before. You might not have paid that much attention to them, to be honest. But informational leaflet is basically a mass-produced booklet that can be used for many different purposes, but the main ones really are going to be advertising and marketing or informational purposes. The most common places that people would have seen informational leaflets are going to be things like doctors' waiting rooms, and you often see leaflets about different health issues. You know, there's quite a lot knocking about now for the coronavirus, as you probably guessed. You do often see them in places like I don't know, lobbies of hotels and stuff like that. You know, different tourist information where they might be advertising a certain I don't know, theme park or some sort of tourist location that you can go to, and it's designed to try and get people to encourage them to go there. The information that's in these leaflets are usually designed to be something that's you know, easy to digest, very simple to understand. You only really need to read it once and get all the information that you need. Okay, and I usually fold it and split into 6 different sections, so one piece of paper folded into 3 different sections, double-sided. So the purpose, as you probably guessed, is it informs readers about that topic. You can read, I don't know, a leaflet about South Yorkshire Animal Park or something like that, and it might tell you all the information you need about it. So what's there, how much did it cost, where is it, how did you get there. The information is simple, easy to understand. You only really need to read it once, and the information's got to be concise as well. Okay, you don't really find a lot of information in leaflets that will have too much text on there, which is because it's been written in a way to make it, to ensure that it's very concise and very simple. Advantages of using leaflets, they're very cheap to produce on mass scale. Okay, we don't need to worry too much about costs and stuff until we look at printing techniques, which we won't be doing for a couple of months yet, but they are very cheap to make, and it can be a nice, easy way to get a lot of information across to audiences in a very simple way. You will also find a lot of leaflets are very stylish and very visually, you know, aesthetically pleasing as well. Okay, they might have some nice, interesting designs on there, which would be quite nice to look at. However, the problem really with a disadvantage, I should say disadvantage, not discard, I don't know why it does that. Me being thick, never mind. The disadvantages is there. I imagine not a lot of you actively go out of your way to read leaflets. Okay, it's not something you do in your spare time. So it can be quite difficult to get people to look at leaflets, okay? So they're not widely accessed, they're not that easy to find. I don't know where I need to go to find, you know, a stand of leaflets, to be honest. It's probably not something that you actively seek out. And it's one of those things as well, if it's designed poorly, you're not going to take in the information that you need. You don't want to be reading a leaflet and having to read it 3, 4, 5 times to be able to understand it because the design is crap. Okay, if it's designed poorly, people aren't going to pay much attention to it, so they will discard the information that they need. Okay, so moving on to our second type of factual communication. I'm going to go past this really, really quickly because you should know this already. How-to guides. Obviously, you know about how-to guides by now because you've all written one. But just to go back to it, piece of writing, step-by-step process. How can the reader achieve something? The thing that you need to make sure that you're aware of, and a few people have struggled with this when they're writing their own how-to guides, is a how-to guide really should be only about how to achieve one certain specific objective. It shouldn't be something that has a multitude of different possibilities there. So one that, you know, I think with someone last year wanted to do how to revise better, which is fine, but the problem with that is there's a lot of different variations that can come into play. It's not just a one simple step-by-step technique to do one thing, okay? So a better alternative to that could be something like how to, I don't know, set up flashcards for revision or something like that, okay? But how-to guides are often very informal. This is one of the key ones, is they're designed for non-experts, okay? They're meant to be for amateurs, beginners, people who don't know any better, okay? They will often use a lot of elaborate code as well because it's meant to be understood by everyone, especially non-experts, with a simplistic vocabulary as well, so people can follow them very, very easy. Again, advantages, I've said all of this before, okay, it's pretty straightforward, isn't it, really? Okay, simple steps, simple vocab, short, simple stages for ease of use, easy to follow. Disadvantages, though, they only really allow instructions to achieve a fixed objective, okay? So there's little room for variation, but I'll go over that in a bit more detail and move on to the next thing. Don't really allow for more challenging aspects, and they're not ideal for readers with prior knowledge, but that is where instruction manuals comes into it, because these are the things that are often much more complex. They're much more in detail, in depth, and they offer much more of a professional approach or an expert approach of how to achieve something. So you look at this one here, there's a lot more text on there, okay, compared to some of the text that you might have seen from the examples and the how-to guides, okay? A lot more text. They're often much more formal as well, and they are designed for readers who have more experience. I know I used this last time, and it is a bit of a humble brag, but a good example of that would be when I set up my surround sound system at home, okay? The instruction manual for that was massive purely because there was so much variation and complex sort of things that could impact on how I'd like to set up my surround sound, okay? It was a lot more about things like the shape of the room, the personal preferences, so it wasn't just a quick step-by-step, do this, do this, do this, do this, there you go, watch TV, okay? There was much more variation involved in there, which meant that the process was not as straightforward. So I would need something like an instruction manual rather than a how-to guide to set up something that's complex like that. The good thing is about that is it does allow for more variation, okay? You can follow an instruction manual to get something that is more complex, that has more variation there. But obviously that means more content, okay? You could look at that and think, oh great, more text, more detail, but you could also look at that and think, that's a lot of text, I'm not going to read all that, I can't be asked to read all that, I just want pictures, okay? So you can have too much text in there, and too much text can lead to a messy design. Okay, and obviously the language can be a little bit too complex as well. Okay, so they're the three things we need to look at with regards to informative documents. Okay, so the next ones we're going to look at are more about factual news. Okay, so this is more related to things like newspapers, but it also does impact on TV news in a way. We're not going to focus on that because we're purely looking at print communication. So we need to be looking at what sort of things writers need to consider when they are reporting on events. Okay, so basically like live news essentially, or up-to-date news. Okay, and the first thing we need to look at is the 5 W's, okay? It's sort of like the bread and butter of factual journalism is implementing the 5 W's and 1 H when writing about factual news. Now the reason for that is purely because that's what the reader will, consume that article for. They want to know that. So if you're reading a, article about, I don't know, Dominic Cummings breaking the lockdown, you want to know, what happened, where did it happen, when did it happen, who was involved, why did it happen, how did it happen, okay? That's the bread and butter, okay? That's important for the audiences to be able to reader, to take that information away. And knowing that information, that sets up the context for the entire article. Say, for example, you're reading an opinion piece that was criticising, I don't know, the way Boris Johnson has handled the coronavirus. You would expect to find the 5 W's in and around the start of the article, because that sets up the context of the article. Okay, it allows you to understand the rest of the article. Okay, so yeah, you find that obviously a lot in factual news. Now the other thing we're going to look at is almost like the standard and practice that journalists are expected to act when they are reporting on events, and especially researching different events as well. Now this information I've taken from the Associated Press, which I think is an American organisation, but there is a lot of crossover and between UK-based stuff as well. And what they do is they've set up a standard of practice that they are expecting their writers to follow when they are reporting on events and researching events as well. So a lot of these might be common sense, but you'd be surprised about how often these things are sort of, broken essentially, I suppose. I mean, you can easily compare this stuff to the NUJ and the IPSO Code of Practice that we looked at last year. So the first thing that the Associated Press says is that any images that are used in their reporting, they must be unaltered or manipulated in any way. No photoshopping, even if it's just something as simple as changing it to black and white or altering the contrast. By doing that, you could potentially allow the reporting of that news to be reported incorrectly, okay, or falsely, or people could take the wrong impression away from it. So no images are to be unaltered. The date lines and bylines are also very important, because the date line informs the reader of when information has been obtained by a writer and who obtained it. Okay, it might be that the information that you're reading is very much out of date. Okay, if you're reading a news story and the date line is from a year ago, then the information could be massively inaccurate. So the Associated Press also include date lines and bylines so that the reader can ensure that the information they're reading is up to date and it is accurate. Because if you're reading about the news and you're reading about something that's a year out of date, it's not news, it's old, and the information could be out of date, it could be inaccurate. Sources as well. Most of the time, the Associated Press will insist that sources of information, so where do they research their information from, is provided. Okay, it tells you where it comes from. Obviously, if you're given some sort of fact or quote, you want to know where it's come from because it makes it more reliable. Okay, you as a reader could believe that a source has been made up. So all sources are provided to the reader. There are sometimes obviously some situations where sources have to be kept anonymous. However, that's not as common. It's usually for matters of things like political issues or something like that. Quotations as well, this is an interesting one. Any quotations that are used must be unaltered, even including any spelling, punctuation, grammar mistakes. Okay, they don't correct them. Okay, just to keep them safe. Even things like using ellipsis or ellipses must be avoided. Okay, if you don't know what ellipsis is, it's when you have the 3 dots that indicates a quote is unfinished. Okay, could be the start, could be the end, could be in the middle. Ellipsis must be avoided. They might also choose to include things like describing the body language of the person providing the quote and the setting as well, if it's relevant. Okay, and any translations must be faithful, and obviously no plagiarism as well. So these are really discussing what is expected of writers in the way of how they're meant to report factual communication. How are they meant to report events? So basically, in a nutshell, you need to understand that reporting events should emphasize or implement the 5 Ws, because that's what readers are expected to comprehend once they've read a particular report of a event or a news item. And in terms of research findings, you'd expect most writers follow the guidelines that are expected. So a good example to look at is this one here from the Associated Press. I will put I think actually the link to the full website is on the template that I've sent out to you as well. So have a look on there. It's a really, really interesting read, and it shows the sorts of things that are considered when reporting on live events and researching stories. Okay, a couple of terms that you need to know about as well. Body copy, nice and simple. Body copy refers to the main text parts of a piece of factual writing. So look at this copy of The Guardian here, with the very smug looking Dominic Cummings on there. This section here is the body copy of a piece of text. Okay, you will find the most body copy text is usually written in a serif font, and obviously using paragraphs and sometimes pull quotes to make it more readable. Okay, you won't often find body copy to be one huge lump of text. Okay. Right, so what we need to move on to now is looking at typography choices. Now, we did do this last year, so you should know this stuff already, but it's always nice to go over it as a bit of a recap. So, serif fonts are a serif is these little flicks that you find at the end of certain characters here. So you've got these little flicks there at the two sides of the T in the bottom. Okay, this is called a serif. So a serif font is any font that has these little flicks at the end of it. Now, serif fonts are mainly used for body copy text. It's designed to be easy to read for text in large quantities. Okay. Not often, not always the case. It's not a specific rule of thumb, but you'll find that most body copy text is written in a serif font, although there are a couple of exceptions. Sans serif, as you might have guessed, is the exact opposite. Okay, sans is French for without, so a sans serif font is a font that doesn't have the little flicks at the end of it that you can see there. So you can see all these examples here. They don't have the flicks at the end of it because they're a sans serif font. Most sans serif fonts, especially in newspapers, are used for things like mastheads or headlines or stand firsts, because they stand out more. Okay, they're mainly used for text that is designed to stand out. Okay, so you've got a big bold headline there. Okay, the mastheads as well. Okay. They're all using sans serif fonts. Script fonts are something that we didn't really look at too much last year. To be fair, we didn't really look at much fonts last year because of the magazine stuff that we didn't get to do, but never mind. Script fonts are fonts that are designed to look like they have been handwritten. Okay, they're designed to give the impression that they have been handmade, that they are personalized. Okay, it looks like someone's gone out of their way to write lovely calligraphy handwriting, and care has gone into it. So a good example of a famous script font is the font that's used for Coca-Cola. It was a couple of years ago when they had their famous marketing campaign where they had the names of people on all the Coke bottles that you might remember. I think it was 2013, something like that. That was done in a script font, again, to give the impression that it was handmade. It's personalised to you. Not only is it in your name, but we've written that name on there. That's what it's trying to suggest. And the last one we need to look at is display fonts. Okay, display fonts, clues in the name really. It's designed to display something. Okay, it's mainly intended for fonts that are designed to be larger than other fonts. So headlines, mastheads, billboards, that sort of stuff. They're designed to be
legible from a distance. Okay, so that's why you'll find that most headlines are written in display fonts and mastheads, because you can see them from the other end of the supermarket or wherever you are, so you can, you know, make it more eye-catching. They're often very bold, and they're more often than not in a sans serif font, but that's not 100% of the time, because you can see, for example, the Guardian here, that display font is not a sans serif font, it's a serif font. Okay, so there are a few exceptions, but the majority of the time you'll find that they're going to be sans serif fonts. Okay, use of colour. Now, use of colour is obviously very, very important as well when we're talking about factual communication, because the choice of colours that are used in almost any particular media product is something that is done for a reason. Now, again, I don't think we covered this too much last year, but it's important to understand that colours have different meanings. Okay, colours are painstakingly chosen specifically for any particular media product because of what they symbolise, because of what the connotations of those particular colours are. So a couple of examples here would be, if you look at this particular NHS leaflet here, you'll notice that you've got a lot of blue on there. You've got a nice green on there and a white on there as well. Now, you would suggest that the reason why they use these particular blue colours on there is because they're very nice, calming, relaxing colours. Okay, I'd find it very hard to believe that if you were making a NHS leaflet on the dangers of, I don't know, heart condition or something, you wouldn't have loads of really loud, aggressive red colours on there, because it looked like it was shouting at you, and it's probably more likely to bring on a heart attack. Okay, it's very nice, it's very calming, it's very relaxing. Okay, it's, you know, those colours have been specifically chosen because they are of what they symbolise. Okay, very nice, very peaceful, very natural. Okay, same for these colours as well here. Again, another NHS leaflets. When you're looking at examples, NHS leaflets are great for analysing. You've got this particular coronavirus fact sheet for kids on there. Now, again, you would argue that because it's specifically aimed at kids, you've got lots of very nice, bright, pastel, primary colours on there, because they're going to be more appealing to younger audiences. You know, you've got some nice, bright orange and purple, yellow, red, okay? Because they specifically aim at a younger audience. So colours are very important because of what they symbolise. Okay, again, another example here. Again, this is one where you probably had to have a bit of prior knowledge to understand that. But you've got a copy of Mojo. It's got the Sex Pistols on the front cover of it, and it's got, for the main cover line, you've got the neon pink and yellow colours, which, if you don't know, are the colours from the front cover of the Sex Pistols album Nevermind the Bollocks. So, you know, those colours symbolise something. They symbolise punk, and they symbolise this album. Okay. Again, even if you wanted to look at it on a very, 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 very stereotypical level, you would argue that this particular issue of Glamour has got a lot of pink on there, because stereotypically pink is classed as a very feminine colour. You know, although traditionally it's not, but nowadays that's what it's associated with. It's not all about symbolism and connotations, though. It can be used for emphasis. Again, a good example here is this particular headline from the Daily Mirror, where they have put you and your in red, okay? Because by putting these in red, it emphasizes those words. If these two words weren't in red, that headline would read, "Why don't you do your duty?" But because they're in red, and also in capital letters, but we'll come back to that in a second, it says, "Why don't you do your job?" Okay, so the use of colour there completely changes the meaning of that particular headline. Well, not completely changes it, but it certainly gives it a different, more aggressive tone to it. And especially as well, going back to symbolism and connotations, you would argue that red is quite an aggressive colour, because red, you know, typically suggests or connotes things like anger and violence. So colours are very, very important in terms of creating meaning. What do they symbolise? What are the connotations there? You've got this little wheel of emotion at the bottom here that shows all the different emotions that colours can suggest. The use of colour as well, it's not all just about symbolism, it's about readability as well. Okay, the choices of colours can also be purely down to how easy to make something easy to read. I mean, you look at that monstrosity on the screen right now, and you would argue that there's too many colours there. Simple as that, really. Okay. There's so many colours in there. It's probably likely to give someone an epileptic fit. But some colours are specifically chosen based on their readability. Okay. Contrasting colours obviously always often work well together to make it easy to read. So a light text colour on a black background or vice versa is easier to read. Okay. Some colours as well can be easier for people who are dyslexic, okay? Dark text on light background, contrasting colours. It's not always just about what they symbolise, okay? It can be on a practical readability level as well, okay? Okay, so finally we're going to look at use of bolding, italics, capital letters and underline. This is pretty straightforward and it's probably something that you would already sort of assume anyway. So we'll start off with bold letters. Bold letters are often used for emphasis. Okay, so you will find that a lot in things like newspaper headlines, especially tabloid newspaper headlines, and it gives a sense of importance. Okay, it gives the impression of shouting, of passion, of attention grabbing. So you look at this headline here, back of the net, about football returning. It's almost like it's shouting that. Okay, and the fact that it's in bold emphasizes that. Okay, subheadings as well. This is going to be really important for your how-to guides. Use of bold can be used for subheadings. So you've got this how-to guide here on making a cup of tea. The subheading, start with a water, it's in bold, and the number as well. This one here's copy of Glamour here. You've got the word Kim there in bold. Okay, obviously the fact that it's in bold emphasizes it. Okay. It tells you who the article's about, but also it gives it more of a sort of well, emphasis is the word, I suppose, isn't it? Really, it gives it more importance. Okay, it emphasizes the importance of, well, Kim Kardashian, I suppose. You know, she's really not that important. Anyway, again, italics. Simple as that. It's the same sort of thing again, really. It's about emphasis, okay? It can change the way you interpret a piece of writing. So, a couple of sentences on there, it says, that is the only way to achieve a distinction star, okay? The fact that the only is in italics, it puts emphasis on that word, okay? But it can also be used to imply uncertainty or deeper context as well. Okay, so again, the sentence there says you can do it that way if you want, because the can is in italics. It creates that uncertainty. It's almost like, well, you could do it that way, but I wouldn't. Okay, so because it's in italics, it changes that particular meaning and the way you might interpret that. And titles as well. Okay, titles, if you're referencing a product, a book, newspaper, whatever, it will be in italics. So if I was to write something down saying one of the best films of the year is Parasite, it's probably the best film of the year actually, you put it in italics because it's a title. Capitals, again, you find a lot of these techniques are really used for emphasis. So capital letters, again, pretty similar to bold, really. Okay. Again, you look back at that example there, capital letters, even though it's in bold, it's also in capitals. Gives the impression of shouting, you know, emphasis as well. But also, again, it can be used to emphasize certain words as well, similar to italics. Okay, so you've got this headline from the Sun here. It says, "Is this the most dangerous chicken in Britain?" Okay, again, this capitalized emphasizes it. Okay, nice and simple that. And last one, underlining. Okay, and again, really simple, pretty similar. Okay, it creates the idea of emphasis. Okay, it creates importance for that particular word that is in the sentence. Okay, when will they learn? Okay, you've got that emphasis there, underlines it to give it more of a sense of power. Okay, so it creates that sense of importance as well. So again, you've got important safety instructions in bold, underlined there. Okay, it's making sure that you are aware of this particular instruction or whatever it is it's going to tell you about. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, so techniques that you will often see, especially in things like leaflets and how-to guides, is supporting illustrations. Again, nice and simple. They're there to help to emphasize a point. So you've got this example here. again, from a coronavirus, I was going to say instruction manual then, but that's not right, leaflet, it's got a bit of a how-to guide there about how to wash your hands, but it's also got these nice little supporting diagrams to help you understand how to wash your hands properly, which you all should know about anyway, to be honest, okay? That's pretty straightforward, isn't it, really? I don't need to spend too much time on that. So supporting illustration diagrams, really, they help to emphasize a point. Okay, they help back up what you're trying to say, essentially. We also need to look at anchorage. Now, we did do a little bit on this last year. What we looked at last year was very, very straightforward. So when we look at anchorage, it's a theory from 1979 by a guy called Roland Barthes, and it is basically the idea that images can have multiple meanings depending on the way that you interpret the meaning. So one person could look at one image and take one thing away from it, whereas another person can look at another image and take another thing away from it. And anchorage is the idea that you use techniques, mainly text, to help pin down a certain meaning. Okay? You will look at a picture, and maybe you'll look at a headline next to that picture, and that headline will help explain what that image is. So newspaper front pages are often very good examples of that. Now, the example here I'm going to show you shows you what I mean. So on here, you've got two newspapers that use the same image. So you've got the Sun and the Scottish Sun. They both use the same picture of Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings, okay? However, they have different text, okay? And those texts create different meanings, all right? So you look at this one of the Sun here, it says, backed, Bojo stands by his top aide, okay? And PM defies calls to sack him. So that one there, you'd probably say, without reading the entire article, you'd probably say is more likely to be interpreted as being more supportive of Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings. Okay, it describes him as a top aide. It's saying he's standing by him, he's loyal, he's defying people. Okay, whereas this one, exactly the same image of Boris Johnson. Okay, maybe a little bit smaller. Okay, and little thumbnail picture of Dominic Cummings here. However, the headline says, Fury grows as Boris stands by road trip aide. He's not a top aide anymore, he's a road trip aide. And it says Dom and Dumber. Okay, obviously not the most positive headline there, but you can see there how the use of text completely changes the meaning of the image. They're exactly the same image, okay? But the text makes it different, and that is essentially anchorage in a nutshell. Yes, we could talk about for ages about the ethics of the fact that, you know, it's both the same newspaper, but they're talking about different political points. But we're not going to get into that now because I'll be, you know what I'm like. I'll go on for ages criticizing the Sun, but that's just me. So anchorage, text can help down the meaning of the image. Okay, really good example of that. Okay, so that's it for section 1. So now we're going to move on to section 2. Now, a lot of this stuff in section 2 we did cover last year, so you should understand a lot of this stuff already. So, section 2, you need to talk about the different techniques used to effectively communicate factual information. Okay, so clarity. Clarity obviously means how easy something is to understand. Now, it's really, really important that any factual communication is clear. Okay, because people need to understand the fact. Okay. Especially for things like how-to guides or NHS leaflets, it needs to be clear for people to understand it. Okay, so for example, I'm presuming you all got a letter from the Prime Minister a couple of months ago talking about, you know, what you need to do to combat coronavirus. Okay, that information needs to be clear. Okay, for people to understand it. Okay, it needs to be clear because of the wide audience that it was aiming for, because some publications will have different levels of clarity. So if you look at something like The Guardian and compare it to something like The Mirror, the level of clarity will be very different because they have different audiences, and The Guardian will probably more likely have a higher reading age of the Daily Mirror. Okay, but it is really, really important for instruction manuals as well. Okay, the instructions have got to be clear. You know, if the instructions are vague, then how the hell is someone going to follow it? You know, if it says something like, I don't know, preheat the oven to, I don't know, something like 200 degrees, but, you know, 160, could be 240, I don't know, make your own mind up, okay? That's not going to be helpful to anyone who's trying to make cupcakes or whatever, okay? So it's got to be clear, but also conciseness as well, okay? So to be concise means to give a lot of information in as few words as possible while still being informative. So you will find a lot of newspaper stand firsts are very, very concise. This is a great example. I know they're all of the same topic, but this is the only thing that's been in newspapers the last couple of days. So you got, what, 5 lines of text here. It says, Cummings broke stay-home rule to drive virus-hit family 260 miles, then enjoyed birthday trip to beauty spot to test his eyesight, all because he claims his situation was exceptional. That is as concise as it gets. It is basically just summed up the entire Dominic Cummings scandal in, what, about 25, 30 words, okay? That's very concise. And that's the key to good factual journalism, okay? The ability to write something and essentially not waffle, okay? It's about avoiding waffle, essentially, okay? Okay, this one's quite fun. So, ambiguity. So ambiguity is when something is unclear or can be interpreted different ways. Now, obviously, if you're talking about factual journalism, ambiguity is going to be very, very important because, avoiding ambiguity is going to be very important because people might not understand the facts, or you might misrepresent facts, okay? The way you phrase something might paint a different picture to what actually happens and doesn't tell the truth. It's not just about the language that you use as well. It could be the actual visual style of the way you structure a newspaper front page, for example. So, a couple of examples here. Boy paralysed after tumour fights back to gain a black belt. Now, that can be interpreted different ways. You could look at that and look at the intended meaning, which talks about a boy who had a tumour and has now got a black belt. But the way it's written grammatically, you could also read that as the tumour has got a black belt. Doesn't make sense, but you know, it's unclear, isn't it? Okay. Princess Diana's dresses to be auctioned. Are her dresses being auctioned, or is she dressing up because she's going to be auctioned? Doesn't make sense. Okay. More time granted to murder police. You know, it's unclear. It's ambiguous. Okay. And with factual journalism, you've got to be clear. Now, this bit here, this one probably makes me laugh. Language-wise, absolutely fine, but the way that this newspaper here has been laid out, again, makes something more ambiguous. Okay, it also links back to Anchorage as well in a little bit. So it says, I could have helped prevent the Iraq War. Okay, now obviously the way you should be reading that is talking about Saddam Hussein's lawyer. However, you could look at that and think, oh, when did Tom Jones say that? You know, how could Tom Jones help prevent the Iraq War? So avoiding ambiguity is very, very important for factual journalism, okay? Things have got to be clear, okay? There can't be any sort of confusion about facts, okay? About what you're trying to say. Accuracy, again, yeah, pretty straightforward, okay? You know, I'm not going to go into the whole accuracy of tabloid newspapers now because that's a massive debatable topic, and again, I'll go off on a bit, but it's, you know, pretty clear that, you know, any factual print needs to be accurate because otherwise it's not representing facts, is it really? You know? Okay, bias obviously means to take a side. Now, again, we did this last year, so we know this, and I'm not going to go over this, to be honest, but it's important to understand that most newspapers have an editorial bias with agendas they want to push, and that can impact on the way they represent facts, okay? How they report something, you know, could be very different. So the easiest one to look at the moment is, again, the whole Dominic Cummings fiasco. You know, these two stories both represent the same facts, but the way they report it is very different, because if you look at the Daily Express, Defiant Boris stands by his man, and you look at this little graph here, you'll notice that the Daily Express is more likely to be read by people from the right-wing conservative political allegiance. Whereas Daily Mirror, same story, same facts, but the way they report it, the Mirror is more likely to be read by people who are a bit more left-wing. Okay, so people who are more likely to vote Labour. So the political bias can impact on the way that a newspaper might represent fact. Okay, really important to understand. Now, Register, again, we did this last year. Register talks about how does a piece of writing speak to the reader. So it's basically about things like the level of language they use, the vocab that they use, and how they might have different register based on their audience. So that really means looking at things like the formality of the language. Is it more informal or is it more formal? It will all depend on the publication. Okay, formal means it's well formed, it's grammatically accurate, it might be a bit more challenging, it might be a bit more what you might refer to as traditional English, okay, a bit more old-fashioned potentially. Whereas informal is much more relaxed, it's much more open to use of slang and colloquialisms and abbreviations. Okay, look at this copy of The Sun here, you've got using the word prem for premiership. Okay, it says back of the net, obviously a very colloquial phrase. It says footy instead of football. Okay, whereas this one says at the time, football's kick off on 17th of June with fake cheering. Okay, it's much more formal. Okay, so there's quite a clear comparison there between those two, the registers of those two particular publications. Yeah, mode of address, we did this last year. Okay, pretty straightforward. The three main mode of addresses that we looked at. Again, mode of address means how does it communicate directly with the reader. So peer-to-peer, more relaxed, more informal, more conversational, more colloquial. Teacher-to-pupil, which is more informative and instructional, so you'll find that a lot in how-to guides and instruction manuals. And parent-to-child, which is more similar to teacher-to-pupil, but it's a bit more simplistic in terms of the delivery. Reading ages, right, okay, now this is really important as well when you're talking about the register. So this links back to the level of vocabulary that is used in particular publications, and it links back to how easy a particular piece of writing is to read. So the average reading age in the UK is that of a 9-year-old. Okay, I'll let that sink in for a second. And The Sun exploits that by having a reading age of an 8-year-old. Okay, I did like this particular headline here. It says tabloids are worse for vocabulary than not reading a newspaper, which is particularly, shocking. And The Guardian has a reading age of a 14-year-old. So again, it all really depends on the audience. Okay, because The Sun is specifically trying to aim at as wide an audience as possible, and they know the average reading age in the UK is that of a 9-year-old, they deliberately made sure their reading age was particularly low. And obviously we've done this last year as well, elaborate and restrictive code. So a bit of a recap. Elaborate code is where the writer would assume that the reader has little to no prior knowledge of the topic. It's going to be something more formal. They will probably use little to no subject-specific or technical term and a high level of vocabulary as well. So you're more likely to find elaborate code in things like how-to guides and instruction manuals, especially how-to guides, because they're more written for amateurs. Whereas restricted code is the more opposite. It's assuming the reader understands the context of a topic or they have that background sort of knowledge. Okay, so we also need to look at evidencing and referencing sources as well, and how factual writing, it's essential to make sure that sources are referenced. So it's not, obviously a lot of factual reporting will use things like facts and stats and statistics to make an article feel more trustworthy. If you're reading, say, I don't know, I'll use the example on the screen, an article that is about the death rates in coronavirus. If it had no statistics in there, you are less likely to trust it. However, if it has statistics in there, you again are more likely to trust the source. So this article here has got the confirmed cases, new cases, and UK death total. So it makes it more reliable. However, it's not just about using evidence, it's about talking about where does that particular evidence come from, okay? Have you just made up those numbers on the spot? Okay, where do they come from? Are they reliable? So again, you talk about how this particular article here, the way it evidences its sources and references its sources is quite reliable because yes, it's got the evidence there, but it also tells you where it comes from. And not only does it tell you where it comes from, the actual source is reliable as well. It comes from Public Health England. You're going to trust Public Health England, aren't you, really? Okay, it's not as if you got this information off, I don't know, Colin's coronavirus blog or something, okay? It's from a reliable source, okay? So that makes it more likely to be trusted by the reader. Last section now, and again, I'm not going to spend too long on this because you know this stuff already, but obviously you're aware about the legal and ethical codes of practice, okay? That writers need to follow. So you got the NUJ, National Union of Journalists. Their role is to protect journalists. Okay, they work for journalists on things like fair pay, on working conditions, blah blah blah. But also they have a code of conduct as well that they expect journalists to follow. Okay, so nice and simple. You noticed the phrase this last year. And obviously you've got IPSO as well. IPSO is more about protecting the public from writers. Okay, so if, say, for example, someone writes an article about you that you think is inaccurate, you can complain to IPSO about what they have written. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward. That you know this stuff already. Right, that is pretty much it, and I'm done talking now because I'm in desperate need for a cup of tea. My voice is starting to go, which is great because I've not spoken like this for ages because obviously we've all been, you know, on lockdown. So I know that was a lot to take in. Like I said, I'm not expecting you to have watched all this video back to back. If you have, well done, you deserve a medal because, you know, that's a commitment. I hope all that stuff made sense. I tried to make it as simplistic as possible. If anyone has any questions or doesn't understand any of the stuff that I've just gone through, please do email me. But yeah, that's pretty much it for assignment 2. I'm not going to set a deadline yet because, you know, we're going to chip away at it slowly, okay? In a couple of weeks, I will put an actual deadline out there for you. But for now, what I will do is on the first Monday, which will be the 1st of June, I think, I will send out the first sections that I want you to be working on. One thing I will say, just as a reminder though, is the examples are going to be absolutely key for this assignment, okay? The level of detail you put into your examples pretty much is the main way for you to make sure you're going for a merit and distinction grade, okay? The more detail you put into examples, the more comparisons, the more assessment, the more evaluation you put in there, the more likely you are to get that distinction grade, okay? But, you know, I will be giving you regular feedback. I'm not going to give you loads to do all at once, and we will chip away at it slowly. If anyone's got any questions, please email me, but that is pretty much it. So, yeah, see you later, and stay safe.